Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good. Hey, Spence, before you run off, I got one thing I want to say. I know you got a lot of pull with the good Lord, and I know that you strive to get these beautiful days for this event. But this is like 2 or 3 years in a row now that this has been the best flats fishing morning ever for February. And we're in here. We want to be out there on days like this. Please do. You know what? If you do that, you'll have 400 plus in here. All right, good morning, everybody. Like Spence said, I am Captain Brent, Stanley. I do own Current Adventure Charters based out of Wilmington. I fish from North Topsail, Southport, Bald Head, and my specialty is sight fishing for redfish, fishing for speckled trout, flounder, but redfish is definitely what that's what I specialize in. You got a lot of good guys in this area that put you on some redfish. You got a lot of guys that differ in their approach. My thing is artificials. I love fishing for redfish with artificial baits, getting on the flats, 2-3 foot of water or less, pulling around. We're basically hunting these fish. We're sight fishing. We're looking for these fish laid up on an oyster bar, up next to the grass, a school of fish pushing down a bank. When you can see that and you can throw that little artificial lure in front of them and get that fish to bite, it's the biggest rush in the world. Don't get me wrong, there's always a time and a place for taking a Carolina rig and a finger mullet, a pogie, and soaking it on the bottom. There's a lot of times during the year that that's what I have to resort to put my clients on fish, because there's certain times of the year that these fish just, the water's real warm. They don't want to chase a bait. So there's so many different ways to catch these fish, and that's what, to me, makes these fish so much fun to target. It's not just one bait. There's just all kinds of things that you can do to catch these fish, and it doesn't matter if it's a little 15-inch rat or 30-plus overslot fish. They're just so much fun to catch on light tackle. They just you got all the power in the world, and they're just lots and lots of fun to catch. As Spence said, I grew up here in Wilmington. I've got over 40 years fishing the waters in this area. When I was a kid, I grew up a pier rat. I don't know how many of you remember when, what is it they call it now? The Oceanic. We knew it as Crystal Pier. And, I grew up, my parents were school teachers. In the summertime, I'd have my mom and dad take me down to the pier before they went to work in the morning, and they didn't pick me up till after sunset. I mean, that's how I spent my summers. I spent on the pier, and of course back then, as a young kid, all I wanted to do was catch a king mackerel. King mackerel, king mackerel, king mackerel. Now I could care less if I caught a king mackerel. Most of my life I spent in a boat on the ocean, targeting king mackerels, mahis, sailfish, what have you. I guess it was back in about 2002, 2003, I went down to Florida to visit my cousin, and we took his little 13-foot whaler and went down on the Banana River looking for redfish, trout, snook, and I absolutely fell in love with it. That was the start of my inshore career. We didn't know what we were doing, didn't have a clue. Like I said, I was an offshore guy. I spent most of my time, pulling baits, chasing, pelagics. But we went down there and got into the trout, the redfish, the snook, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. And I came back and I was like, that's what I want to do. And so I started looking for a smaller boat. I found a used 17 Polar. It was a tub. It was a flat bottom, beat your brains out on a choppy day, but it had a wide beam and it drafted about 10 inches, and that was the start of it. Now I've moved up to a really nice flats boat. You know, I can pole in 8 inches of water, and you know, it's just nothing like getting out there and just sight fishing these fish and watching that redfish turn on that bait and just come right up and eat it, and then you set the hook on. It's just a feeling that if you've not experienced it, you need to experience it, because it's a rush. We'll start off talking about tackle. Mainly your rods and your reels. I've told people before, you know, you can spend as much or as little as you want. To me, it's personal preference. I have fished with, you know, off-brand rods. I've fished with name brand rods. I've fished with Penn, Akuma, Shimano, Daiwa. All I can tell you is find something that you like, that you had good success with as far as holding up, you know, line management, and you'll be happy. I've gone through a lot of reels. First of all, let me say, I have no rod and reel sponsorships. You know, nobody's paying me to plug their equipment. But Shimano Stratics are hard to beat. They aren't cheap, but if you fish braid like I do, that's the best reel I've found to handle line management. And by line management, I mean wind knots. If you fish with braid and you've had problem with wind knots, look at a Stratic. You know, when I first, you know, before I switched over to them, you know, I was scratching my head. I was like, gosh, no, it's $150 a piece to, you know, to put in the hand of somebody from Ohio, West Virginia, that don't have a clue what they're doing and what's going to happen if he drops it over the side of the boat. I've just lost $150. Then I looked at the other side of that equation and I said, well, you know, that's a good risk to take, considering that if I don't and I keep using these other reels, I'm spending a whole lot of time sitting back here in the back of the boat doing this, trying to figure out how to get that wind knot out so these guys can keep fishing. Find tackle that works for you. I'll be glad to give you my recommendations. Like I said, Shimano Stratic, as far as I'm concerned, you can't beat. They're not the high end, they're not the low end, but you know, the maintenance port, you know, and all makes it just a great reel. Rods. I like a graphite rod, 7 foot, medium action, you know, something with some, you know, with some good action to it, because you want to be able to set that hook, you know, when that fish bites. Yeah, I've had some rods that are, you know, really light action, and they're, you have a fish bite and you go to set the hook and it's like a sponge sometimes, and you just cannot get a hook set. That's frustrating. And I've had some really, you know, big name high dollar rods that are like that, and you know, I'm like, man, I wish I had that $50 medium action rod I used to have, because it just set the hook every time. But you know, 7 foot with a good action, because we're throwing light stuff, and we want to be able to, you know, just to, you know, get, you know, good cast, get good distance, because we're pounding the banks, we're pounding the oyster bars. Just that seems to work best. I'm sure most of you have, you know, rods and reels you're pretty happy with. That's just my preference. And as I said before, my line of preference is braided line.
What pound test are you using on that?
20 pound. And that's a good question. You ask a question, you get a prize. You're welcome. One-piece rods. To me, a two-piece rod is only good for one thing, and that's for if you're going on an airplane or something, and if you don't have a rod tube. Two-piece rods just don't have the, you know, the backbone, the action, the feel. You want to keep that blank as seamless as possible. I prefer Power Pro. I prefer 20 pound. Now, the reason I say that is 20 pound is going to handle anything that you're going to come across, you know, out there on the flats and in the shallow water. I prefer 30 series reel. 25, 30. And with 20 pound and a 30 series reel, you know, you've got close to 200 yards of braid. So, you know, line is not an issue. You know, if you get down there in the lower end of the Cape Fear River and you happen to find that tarpon that I've seen for the last 2 years down there, and you hook him, you got a chance to at least get your motor fired up and go chase him if he starts to spool you. I really like throwing 10 with some of my really light lures. The problem that I found with the 10 is though it's so thin that a lot of times it'll want to get wrapped up in that bell roller. So the 20 seems to work the best. Again, personal preference, overall day in and day out, 20 pound. But to that 20, I always tie fluorocarbon leaders. 15, 20 pound fluorocarbon leaders, unless I'm trout fishing. When I'm trout fishing, I go down to 10 or less.
On your leader?
On my leader, just the leader. You can still fish the 20 pound braid, but drop down to a light a leader as possible. Especially when those trout are finicky. I mean, there's some days that the trout are just anything you throw out there they're going to eat and it doesn't really matter. But if you get out there in that situation where, you know, it seems like it's kind of hard to get a bit, you know, drop that leader down a little bit and see if that'll help you. I usually start out with about 2 foot, 18 inches to 2 foot. And the reason for that is I think that's a good overall length, but as you're fishing, you get into the oysters and stuff, you're going to be trimming that leader up, and when it gets up to about 12 inches, you need to just cut it off and retie it. Yes, sir.
How do you fasten the braid to your?
My braid to my fluorocarbon leader, uni knot. Yeah, I've found that overall day in and day out is a good knot. You don't have to worry about it breaking. It's fairly easy to tie, and it'll just, excuse me?
Which knot did you say?
Uni to uni knot. And if you don't know how to tie one of those, catch me after this outside, and I'll show you. I'll also show you how to tie the loop knot that I use to tie most of my artificials onto my leader, which helps to give them a little extra action. And so you just walk me right into my next point. Yes, sir.
If you camouflage your rod, will it help getting fish to bite?
Well, if I camouflage my rod,
And the line and the hook?
probably not. But you know what? If you think it looks good, then I'd fish it. And you get a prize. You're welcome. Habitat. Where are we going to go look for a redfish?
In the water.
In the water. So what do I look for? Next to my boat in the water? Come on in, just don't crowd me. I'll share it with you all day long. Redfish like mud. They like oysters. They like to be along the edge of grass. If you can find you a little spot, it's got all three of those, you're in a prime spot. I tend to try to work areas that are calm, not so much current. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of days where I'll go fish right in the middle of a creek and there's current there, but I'm usually picking up singles. I'm not finding big schools in general. You're trying to get up on these flats in shallow water and look for the schooling fish, which you typically find more in early spring, late fall, and winter. It seems to me like more during the summer as the water temperature warms up and there's more bait and the fish are more active, they scatter. You'll find a few schools, you know, of maybe 10 or 12 fish, but you don't find the 100, 200 fish schools like you do in the winter. Now, there's always exception to that rule, because for the last 2 years, the week of 4th of July, I found a little spot that'll hold a fish, a school of 200 fish, and they love topwater plugs. And I live for that week. Yes, Billy? You probably know where it is, but I'm not going to tell you. I'll take you with me. How's that? You'll kill him for me? Now see, Billy usually just heckles me during this show every year, but that was he's starting out easy on me. No, seriously. When I'm out there, I like to move along and pound the banks, work points, creek mouths. A lot of times, if it's in the middle of the summer and, like I said, I don't know where's a school of fish hiding or holding, and I'm kind of in that recon mode, where I'm out just looking, I'll drop the trolling motor and I'll just move along the bank, and I'm just sitting there and I'm just casting, constantly casting, pounding until, I get a hookup, and then I'll concentrate on that area a little bit more. But as I said, just last weekend I went out and I was coming along this bank, and of course the grass stops and it's a nice oyster point. It kind of feeds off, and there must have been 100 redfish laying right on the edge of those oysters. Now, they didn't want to bite. They're a little bit cold still. They're there. And we didn't have this going on this morning, I'd probably be down there right now trying to get them to bite, because I guarantee you they're still there. That's the other thing about these fish is they're predictable. As long as you don't go wear them out, they're predictable. And they'll stay in the same areas day in and day out. They may not stay in that same area at all times of the year, but you can pattern these fish. There's an area that I have, down towards Snow's Cut. Again, Billy, I ain't gonna give you the exact location, but starting here in another 2-3 weeks, I'm gonna go start looking, because the past 2 or 3 years, I've gone in there starting in March, and there'll be 500 fish in a place about as big as this room. But, you go in there today, they're there. You'll go in there 2 days from now, they're not there. And you'll come back 2 days after that, and they're there again. So, they are moving, but they're fairly predictable. Yes, sir? My experience is that when the water gets below 55, they're really, really, really hard to get to bite. Not saying that you can't get them to bite, but that seems to be the point that they really, really, really get finicky. Anything 60 and above, they're pretty active. When you start getting into middle of the summer, when it's 80, 85, it's an early morning, late night bite. So they've got a pretty good range. When the water's between 70 and 75, that's probably when they're most active, and they put up the best fights because they got lots of energy. There's a lot of saturated oxygen in the water at that temperature, and then they've got a lot of of energy when you hook them. Yes.
What do the tides have to do with catching?
I prefer. Well, it depends. If I'm on a pole and I've got a flat that I can pole on dead low water, and that's holding at least 12 inches of water, then I want to go at low tide, because I can get on the pole around, and in 12, 18 inches of water or so, you can see these fish. If I'm fishing down the lower Cape Fear where the water's a little muddier and the water's up, I prefer to fish a high falling tide. And my reason behind that is when the water gets up, all that bait goes into grass. And if you've ever fished down the edge of the grass on high water, you can actually, you'll see the marsh grass, where the redfish are running through it. They're up in that grass. You'll see them tailing way up in the grass, because they're up in there, digging up, crabs and what have you. But when that water starts to fall, they got to come out of there. And when they come out, then they start running up and down the grass, around the edge of the grass, because they're waiting to catch that bait that's coming out of that grass, because the bait's got to come out of there too, but it doesn't have to come out quite as quick as the redfish does. Yes, sir.
You ever fished in Charleston, Isle of Palms area?
Yes, I have.
What do you think of it?
I love it. I love it. And no, I'm not going to go there. I should, but I'm not. That Bulls Bay, Clelandville, I can't wait to go back. It's been a couple years since I've been down there, but they have a phenomenal fishery. Okay, I'm going to go there. And we could too. House Bill 353 support it. That's all I'm going to say. Baits. I have often said that a redfish is nothing more than a largemouth bass on steroids. How many of you have ever largemouth bass fish? Ever? Looks like most of you. As you know, when you're bass fishing, there's all kinds of baits. There's soft plastics, spinner baits, spoons, jigs, rubber worms. Whatever you could catch, whatever you feel like you could catch a bass on, you can catch a redfish on. They're not that picky. My tackle bag consists of soft plastics, jigs, spoons, spinner baits, stick baits, and topwater plugs. That pretty much covers it. I used to say color didn't really matter unless it was white. But I have found that darker colors seem to work really, really well. And especially in my soft plastics, I like a darker color with some flake in it. Soft plastics, I'm partial to the DOA paddle tail, the little 3-inch paddle tail. And since these fish like to hang around structure, it's just like bass fishing. If you can rig it weedless, you can fish it without getting hung up. And for the few of you that's been lucky enough to get one of these little goodie bags so far this morning, you have a couple of my favorite colors of the DOA paddle tail, along with a sample of the type of hook that I use, which is, it's basically a worm hook that has lead, melted to the shank of the hook. So you're able to rig it like you would, a bass worm, and bring this hook and tuck it back into the top of the bait. So now you've got a totally weedless bait. So when you're throwing this up against the grass, along the oysters, you can fish it through this structure, without getting hung up. Yes, sir?
What
Day in and day out, I prefer a 3/0. I will fish as large as a 5/0. It just depends on the bait. And I have fished some smaller hooks, but a redfish has a pretty large mouth. And well, I'm not so worried about him crushing it, but just you want that little bit bigger hook gap. I mean, just to get that hook set. That being said, one of my my most favorite baits in the world is one of these little bucktail jigs here. And when we first started fishing these 7 or 8 years ago, we used the Hank Brown. And if you've ever used the Hank Brown, it's got a little 1/0 hook in it. It's tiny. It's strong, but it's tiny. And we caught a lot of fish on it. But one of my fishing partners, he was like, we only had this with a larger hook. So he actually, we sat down and drew it up and we sent it off and had the casting made. And he hand ties these for me. But this has a 3/0 black nickel hook in it. So that seems to be, the hook size that works best day in and day out. If I'm fishing a big rubber worm, I may fish a 5/0 hook. And I'll either rig it, Carolina style or Texas style, or sometimes I'll use a big 5/0, weighted hook. And you just rig it weedless like that, and you just pitch that rubber worm along the grass. And, they'll just, I don't know what it is. I don't know what they think it is, but they like it. How do I fish the jig? In the warm water of summer, spring, summer, when the pinfish are around, get you a little bag of fish bites, crab flavor. I don't know if it tastes like a crab. I've never tasted one, but that's what they say. And just cut you a little bitty piece of it. I mean, 1/4 of an inch long and 3/16 of an inch wide. And just put it on the hook. And all you're doing is just trying to give some scent and some flavor to this thing. And just, cast it out. And what I like to do is where's the rod? Let me demonstrate. Imagine that, I have one of these tied on. I'm sorry? Exactly. You just, you toss it out there, and this is going to be a little bit difficult to do because I don't want to jerk this thing in my face, but what I like to do is take my rod tip and just kind of twitch it up to about 12 o'clock, and then just let it fall straight back down. Reel up your slack and repeat. 9 times out of 10, that fish is going to eat it when it's falling. And so when you reel up that slack and you get ready to twitch it again, you're just going to feel him on there and just rear back and set the hook. You have a question? No? Looked like you had a question. Yes, sir.
Are the bucktails tied with deer hair, or do you ever use a synthetic hair?
They're all tied with deer hair. There is a little bit of mylar flash in this one. The colors are, I like copper colors. I like a white and a black combination. The darker colors tend to work the best, from what I've just my experience. Like I said, you used to be able to buy some of these down at Island Tackle. Lewis used to, like I said, a friend of mine and Lewis actually hand ties these. So Lewis may have some at Island Tackle. If he doesn't, you want some, call me. I can arrange for you to get some. Other soft plastics, of course, everybody's fish with a gulp. Gulp's fish crack. Kind of the same deal with a gulp shrimp or the jerk shads or whatever. I tend to like to use the weighted hooks because I can, again, to me, being able to rig baits weedless goes a long, long way. Because, you know, if you fish an open jig head, you know, something like this, it's got its place, you know, but you want to fish this in an area that's what I call clean, you know, where there's not that much to get hung up on. Otherwise, you're going to be just constant. You throw this around an oyster bed, I can guarantee you the oyster's going to eat it, and you're going to just be and you're going to get frustrated, and you're going to move on whether it's fish there or not. Yes.
Do you rig those shank rig hooks? Do you go ahead and pass the weight through the bait? You just try to do it.
Yes.
Carefully.
Yes. Here's one rig. You can look at it. Yes. Take the weight, and you know, I've got where I probably don't use the hooks that are more than 1/8 of an ounce, 3/16 at the most. But you know, push it through, bring the weight all the way through it, twist it, and run it back through. There is no weed guard on them. We tried that once or twice. Well, wait a minute. I'll take that back. He does sometimes put some weed guard on those. And actually this one does. I don't know how much good it really does. I mean, it's just a pretty stiff mono type weed guard. But the beauty about this is with that flat head, it pretty much stands up like this all the time. So even when it's sinking, it kind of stays in this orientation, and you know, it doesn't get hung up that bad. Another tip that I'm going to give you is for when you do get hung up, how many times have you got, you're working a bait, you got hung up, and you do this. How much success do you have getting it loose? What I have found is that if that bait's hung up, if you'll just take the line in your hand and just pull with your hand with just steady pressure, 9 times out of 10, it'll pop loose. Don't ask me what the difference is between pulling it with your hand with that steady pressure or pulling it with the bend in the rod, but I have just, you usually just take it and just pull with steady pressure. If it's hung on an oyster, a lot of times that oyster will just, you know, roll over or something, and it'll pop loose. That's just, you know, one of the little things that I have just, you know, learned over the years that, you know, will help save you some baits day in and day out. Gold spoons, yes sir. Gold spoons. Gold spoons are a great search bait. Because you can work a lot of water, you can cover a lot of water, and they're simple to fish. I mean, it's pretty much you throw them out and you retrieve them. Now, one of the little tricks that I like to do is to take like a grub, a curly tail grub. Just take that grub and just put it on the back of your spoon like that. Now, when you retrieve this, you can retrieve it a whole lot slower, and the action of this spoon has been totally changed. It no longer just comes through the water spinning like this. Now it does this. And that curly tail is doing this. And that redfish does this. I hate swivels. No sir, I do not fish swivels at all. It really doesn't. The braid doesn't have the memory that mono does. Now if you fish mono, yeah, you probably want to use a swivel. But I don't use swivels. It's another link in the chain that can break, and to me it takes away from the sensitivity of the braided line and the graphite rod. If you've got braided line, graphite rod, you can feel what the bottom is. If you're fishing something along the bottom, you can tell if it's mud, if it's rock, if it's shell, if it's grass. You can feel that through the rod. I mentioned stick baits. These new 17 and 18 MRs by Mirror are not only great for trout, but redfish love them too. To me, are the closest thing that I found that mimics a small pokey on your tackle store shelf. It's got a little rattle in it. Some of them do, some of them don't. I think this one did. It doesn't rattle anymore. Yes? This is a 17 MR by Mirror. This is a suspending bait, which makes it good for fishing in 3 foot of water because it suspends at about 1.5 feet. If you can find them, the 18 MR is a sinking bait, and this fall when the trout bite, or this spring when the trout start biting again, or right now if you want to go out and catch the trout, the 18 MR is a sinking bait that'll get closer to the bottom, and I've just had tremendous success with that bait this year. Yes, sir. Topwater lures, my favorite. Summertime is best. Yeah, the water temperature's got to be up 68 plus typically, because those fish have got to have enough energy that they're willing to chase. Right now, Billy might get one to chase a topwater bait, but I don't know that I could. Can you, Billy?
No, I couldn't get them to bite yesterday.
You couldn't get them to bite yesterday? Yeah, typically topwater is more of a summertime bait. When the fish are more active, they're willing to chase bait. They got the energy to do it, and there's probably no more fun way to catch a redfish than on topwater. Amen. Amen. And speaking of topwaters, what's your favorite? Donkey donk. Skitter walk. What size skitter walk? The bigger one? Well, I'm going to tell you. I started throwing the 08 this year, which is a little bit smaller. The redfish will eat this thing alive. And it's pretty evident by this one because it's chewed all to pieces. This is a skitter walk. Size 08. They're hard to find. Go to your tackle shop and say, I want some skitter walk 08s, and get them in. Again, I like something with a dark back and a light belly. This here is a Zero Spook. So it's very similar, and all of these are plugs that get the walk the dog action. You're twitching your rod tip, and they're just back and forth, left and right, across the surface. This one here is got a black back, got some gold sides, kind of a white belly. It's been a real good bait for me. This one here again. The skitter walk here is a black back, sort of the golden sides with the lighter belly, a little orange up here on the mouth. These are baits that I fish day in and day out. A lot of times you'll hear people say, well, topwater, that's a morning bite or a late afternoon bite. That's true, but on a cloudy day you better throw it all day long because they'll eat it. I would tend to agree with that. It's funny, you think that you'd want something light, but actually the dark color, actually looking up from it from below, I guess, is more of a shadow. It gives some some different color, something for them to key in on. I like one that's got a rattle in it too. I think noise goes a long ways. One other thing that I want to say about your top waters, typically the hooks that come on these things are crap. First thing you need to do is change them. Get you a pair of split ring pliers, and what I have found is the VMC hook. They're called a Sure Set, and they've got one of the hooks, it's a treble hook, but one of them is bigger than the other two. It kind of hangs down or sticks out more. And since I have gone to those, my hookup ratio has probably doubled or tripled. What, Billy? Yes, on the back one, the big hook faces up. On the one in the middle or the front, the big hook faces down. And that's just so it'll lay up on that bait good. Did you have a question in the back? That answered it? Okay. Number 4s, overall were probably the best. I have used some 6s. I mean, even these, the 17 MRs, the 18 MRs, I've changed those out and use these hooks on those as well. And you want to just match the hook size to the bait. If it's a bigger bait, go with a bigger hook. If it's a smaller bait, go with a smaller hook. Kind of keep it proportional. I mean, you can kind of look at it and say, if I were to put a number 4 or number 2 on this, you'd be like, whoa, that's just way too big. And it probably isn't going to fish very well because it is too big.
Change the hooks on all your baits?
Yes, sir. I mean, all my stick baits, I either, I mean, during trout season, if I'm just trout fishing, I may fish the standard hook that comes on this bait. But, as far as redfish go, I like these VMCs. The hookup ratio is just a whole lot better. They're strong, they're sharp, and they last a good long while. Black nickel hooks go a long ways. I've fished a lot of different hooks over the years, and black nickel seems to last longer than just a regular bronze hook. You fish a bronze hook one time, and you come back and your tackle box looks like a rust bucket. Yeah, Billy.
On the MR17, do you prefer to color?
I've had a really, this, the white sides, kind of, the flash with the dark back or the green back. That's been my bait of choice as far as the 17 or the 18. And I mean, last year, I don't think there were they didn't have the 18s, last fall, not this past fall, but the fall before. And this was a great trout bait. This year they came out with the 18, which is a sinking bait, and it just took over. I mean, as far as trout fishing goes. I didn't hardly even throw the 17 because the 18 just worked so much better because it would get deeper. Yes, sir.
How's the weather, especially barometric pressure and cold fronts, warm fronts, and wind affect when you're going to fish in shallow water areas, stuff like that?
Well, obviously, calm, very, very light wind is best for sight fishing. I mean, if you're actually trying to see the fish to cast to them, because once the wind gets up and you get some ripple or chop on the water, it's just almost impossible. You'll see the fish, but unfortunately you're right on top of them before you see them, and then you've usually spooked them. As far as fronts and barometric pressure and stuff like that, usually when you got a front coming, pressure starting to fall, you usually can get them to bite before the front. When that front goes through and then you get the nice bluebird day, it's perfect, for sight fishing, but unfortunately a lot of times they just won't eat again, they're fairly predictable. Oh no, they'll stay there. They'll stay there. But whether or not you can get them to eat is the question. And a lot of times it depends on, you know, right now the water's 60. I mean, it's coming up, so they're getting a little more active. You know, when it's in the 70s, you probably got a better chance of getting them to bite, just because they're more active. Yes, sir.
Some of your body days make a difference on what color?
Just in general, darker colors seem to work better, and in muddy water, darker colors work better. In clear water, you want a lighter color, a white or a silver. But in muddy water or cloudy days, I like a dark, you know, a motor oil or a new penny color or something like that. Got a few new baits that I've used this past year. And speaking of this past year, how was your summer this past year on catching redfish in general? Was it better or worse than normal?
Awesome.
It was awesome? You never fished one before, had you?
This past was my most predominant year, yeah.
Really? Billy?
It was up a little bit, not in the surf.
Not in the surf? Okay. Personally, I thought this past summer was down. And I think I heard most of you say the same thing.
September was great.
Well, no, I'm talking about most of the summer, I guess. Starting September on, yeah, it was fantastic. But this past spring and summer was tough for me in general. But I just want to feel everybody. I've talked to many of the other guides in the area, and they all said the same thing, that this year was tough. This past summer was tough. The fall picked up, so we're really hoping that this year is going to be really, really good. But just kind of wanted to get your take on that. Questions? Kind of open it up to you guys. Yes, Billy?
What size was that skid, the jig?
This jig?
Skimmer jig, yeah. What size
It's like an 1/8 ounce. I think we got some 8s and some 3/16. They all have the 3/0 black nickel hook.
Oh, when you're putting the trailer on your spoons, are you using a Gulf or are you just using a straight?
Just a regular plastic grub, because it's a reaction strike. You're not really, you sense not that big of a deal. It's a total reaction strike when you're throwing that. That and spinner baits, it's a total reaction strike. It's not like they're gonna come up, sniff it a little bit, and say, "Oh yeah, that smells pretty good. I think I'll take a bite of it." It's just it's coming through the water, and they see it, and they just turn and react on it. But by adding that grub tail to that spoon, like I said, it totally changes the action, so that you can slow your retrieve down. Because without it, you got to pull that spoon pretty quickly to get it to spin.
Yeah.
And when you put that on there, one, it adds buoyancy to the spoon, and it totally, like I said, it changes the action, so that now instead of more of a twist, it's more of almost a walk the dog side to side, but under the water, and your grub tail gets the spin.
Now, when you're fishing the flats with the spoons, when it's bouncing on the bottom, I seem to be getting more on bound when it's bouncing along the bottom. It seems like it's either pissing them off or something. And then hit the spoon.
Yeah, well, you got to remember that redfish are built to be bottom feeders. I mean, their mouth is on the bottom of their head. They're totally by nature built to be bottom feeders, which is part of the thing that makes them so much fun to catch, because we all know that they'll bite anywhere in the water column, either on the bottom, on the top, suspended in between. And that's kind of I think what makes them so much fun to fish for, is because there's so many different things that you can try to get them to bite. If it's bouncing a gulp along the bottom, or ripping a spoon along through the mid column, or topwater bait across the top.
Do you ever fish it without? I mean, on spoons, do you ever fish it without grubs? Or is there
Yeah, sure. If I'm on a flat and I've got a school of fish ahead of me and I can see them, then I'm not going to put that grub tail on there, because one, that without it I can throw that spoon a little bit further, and typically it seems like they're when they're in a school like that, something comes through there, it's like one of them's going to try to get it before the other one does. So it's but if I'm just working down a bank and I'm trying to find fish, then I may try it without the grub tail, or if that's not working, change it up, put a grub tail on it and try a different action. And I mean, it's kind of neat, when you're sitting there and you're working that thing along, and you can see it coming to you, and all of a sudden you just kind of see the water start pushing up behind it. Something's getting ready to happen. What about live bait? Live bait has definitely got its time and place. Carolina rig with a circle hook. That's kind of, I don't do a lot of live bait fishing. I mean, I will in the middle of the summer, because when the water temperature gets, 80 plus, then it's kind of like in the dead of winter. They don't want to chase anything. So you throw a live bait on a Carolina rig. Highly recommend you use circle hooks. I mean, we don't want to deep hook these fish. A 3/0 circle hook, and just let him start swimming off with it. He's going to get hooked up. You don't have to jerk it. It's kind of a no-brainer. Yes, sir.
Do you find casting distance to be a good factor to reaching them without spoofing?
I always try to cast as far as I can, keep my distance. But that being said, I mean, there's been a lot of times where, I've been easing along and, oh man, there's a fish right there. Just a subtle pitch, and you can watch them eat it. That's what's cool about it, when they're that close. I mean, you can watch them eat it.
I've never tried to fish for red. Maybe it's other fishing, but I'm not sure you use polarized glasses or any special. How hard or easy are they to spot?
It takes a little learning what you're looking for. Right now, it's real easy to see them because the water's really clear, and also they tend to be schooled up this time of the year, so they're pretty easy to see. Like I said, the other weekend, we were working down this bank, and actually me and my tournament partner, we screwed up. We had found a couple fish, caught a nice fish, moving on down the bank, and we were like, man, we should be doubling back and go back and work those fish again. We should double back and go back and work those fish again. Well, we should have poled another 30 yards, because another 30 yards in front of us, there was about 100 fish laying in this much water. Well, we screwed up. We fired up the motor and went to spin around, and that's when I saw them, So, yes, sir.
On the Carolina rig, how long of a leader? You need a stick, you got 18. You need a bottom feeder, you don't want to go too high.
I think you don't need to be very long at all. I would say less than, I see people all the time, they're rigging their Carolina rigs with leaders this long. In reality, you don't need but 3, 4, 5, 6 inches.
Use a bank sinker, what kind of sinker?
I know. I just use an egg sinker.
What?
An egg sinker.
Egg sinker?
And just use enough weight to depending on where you're fishing. I mean, if you've got current, you want to go maybe 3/4 ounce. If you don't have any current, just heavy enough to keep it on the bottom. More questions? Yes, sir.
Does the color of the braid make any difference?
No. I have different colored braid on my rods, and it's for me. I've got some in different, I've got some red that's 10 pound, I've got some green that's 20 pound, and it's just for me. And I can look at the rod and say, yeah, that's 10 pound or that's 20 pound, but it doesn't. And the reason I say that is because you want to use a fluorocarbon leader, because that's going to be invisible in the water, and so you're going to have your leader, you'll have your braid, and you'll have this nice invisible piece of fluorocarbon, and then your bait. Yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier your favorite loop for tying stick bait.
Yes. Actually, for about anything that I throw, it's called a loop knot, a canoe man loop knot. And if you'll see me afterwards, I'll pull a piece of leader out and show you how to tie it. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry? How big can they get? Well, what we usually catch is anywhere from about this big to like this. The world record is what, 90-some pounds, I think, which is huge. But typically, we're catching fish that are between 18 and 30 inches. Yes, sir.
Artificial bait like your shrimps and your little fiddler crabs and things like that. Do you have any luck with those?
I do, and actually I'm glad you brought that up. DOA shrimp is an awesome bait, not only for redfish but speckled trout as well. Probably more for speckled trout, but these are great baits. And I've got a trick for this also that I want to share with you. I'm glad you asked that. And this is probably more for you, when you're trout fishing. But how many of you have fished the DOA shrimp trout fishing? How many times have you caught a fish and you bring it in and the body of the shrimp's way up your leader? And then you re-rig it, and on the next fish it's back up again, and you try to re-rig it and it doesn't want to stay, and you're changing out your bait. Here's your solution. Get you a piece of wire leader, number 7, number 9, something like that. Cut you off a small piece. Pull this hook so that the eye is inside the soft plastic. Take this little piece of wire, I don't know if you can see it or not, take this little piece of wire and push it through the plastic, through the eye of the hook. Now, it won't go anywhere. It will not go anywhere. And I got on a school of trout this fall throwing one of these rigged like this, and I think I caught 8 or 10 fish in a row without having to change the bait, and I would have kept catching fish on that one, except for the last fish I caught broke the leader and the bait fell on the deck of the boat, and then the fish kicked it into the water. I think he was mad at me. But that's just another little tip, things that I've learned over the years that I love fishing these things, and what I kept finding was, you fish it and it would just, they love it. It looks, in the water, it's the closest thing to a live shrimp without being alive. But, they would tear it up real easy. But this will keep it from coming off. Yes, sir.
Do you ever add scent to those baits? Do you give them in scent? And if so, what kind? And how often?
Procure is what I've been using most of recently. I'll also open up my little jar of Gulp sometimes and just dip them in that. But the Procure, especially with these bucktails, you can just put that Procure on that deer hair. And again, it's just something to add a little scent, a little flavor, to help entice the fish a little bit more. I'm sorry? Shrimp or crab seems to work best. That's probably, two of the, redfish, trout, that's their main staple. You had a question back here? How do you fish the DOA shrimp? Very slowly. And that being said, all your soft plastics, you want to fish slowly. I don't know how many times I've had customers go with me, and the first thing that they say is, because I'm fishing with you, but they'll start casting out and reeling in, and all of a sudden everybody like, well, yeah, you're fishing at a whole lot slower than I am, and I'm like, yeah, and I'm the one catching the fish too. Slow it down. It's not a race. But the DOA shrimp and other plastics too, I like to fish into the current, because if you're fishing against the current, your bait's going to ride up. Unless you're fishing a heavy jig head that's going to keep it on the bottom. If you're fishing lightweights or light soft plastics or DOA shrimp, for example, if you'll throw it up current and just let it sink with the current, let it sink towards the bottom, reel up your slack, give it a twitch like I kind of demonstrated earlier, to you jump it up and then just let it fall. And what you'll do, you'll feel that fish when it sucks it down. It just feels like a thump. When you feel that, rear back, set the hook.
Setting the hook real quick. I know trout, very soft mouth. It's very easy to pull it and snatch and break your mouth or pull the hook out. With the reds,
you're not going to do that with a redfish.
it's pretty cool.
He's got a tough mouth. He's got a real tough mouth. And that being said, though, but that being said, also as far as the trout goes, with those DOA shrimp, what I found is they'll inhale those things. I mean, when I set the hook, I'm usually not getting them right in the tip of the mouth. I mean, it's usually way back in their mouth. So you can set it pretty good, Yes, sir. Spinner baits? Yes, sir, I do. Again, spinner baits are like gold spoons. They're reaction strike baits. They're great search baits. So if you've got a bank that you're trying to locate fish, throw in a gold spoon or a spinner bait, something you can cover a lot of water until you get that first bite, and then you may try it again or switch up to something else to see if there's a school of fish hanging there or whatever. But yeah, like I said, if you can catch a largemouth on it, you can catch a redfish on it. Yes, sir.
I have several questions here.
Okay.
Comparing line float versus sinking, and the difference in fluorocarbon quality, what you buy and what you use. Because I've seen on some boxes it says nearly invisible, some boxes says visible, invisible completely.
To me, fluorocarbon's fluorocarbon. I just try to find the best deal I can. I mean, I've used Bass Pro brand, I've used Seeger. I can't say that one's better than the other. One costs more than the other. So that's kind of my take. But it's definitely better than monofilament leader, because it's stiffer and it has more abrasion resistance, and it's practically invisible in the water.
And the float part, which line is float versus sinking line?
I really don't have an answer for that. Like I say, I use braided line, and that's all I use. Just because it's you can just feel. I mean, if you fished a graphite rod and braided line, and you've ever bumped that lure against anything, you feel it. When that fish taps it, you feel it. I mean, if it's a pinfish, I'm working that little jig with a piece of fish bites on it in the summertime, and the pinfish are going, you feel it. And I have the hardest time getting my customers to know that you know, I mean, they'll feel that, and they'll, you know, it's kind of hard for me to tell them that, you know, let the little pinfish peck at it, but when you feel the, you know, that's when you set the hook. And there's a distinct difference, and you definitely learn that feel. Yes, sir. I slow roll it. I rarely burn what I would call burn it, you know, but I mean I will either just slow roll it or just a you know, a slow steady retrieve, but I you know, definitely don't burn it. Now gold spoon, I may burn a little more, but I'll slow roll that as well. And for those that don't know what we mean by slow roll, it's kind of where you drag it and let it fall. Drag it and let it fall. At least that's what I call slow rolling. Yes, sir.
What's the difference between like the Spectra or the Fireline or Brady?
You know, they're all basically the same. I think it's personal preference.
Several strands. I mean, is that what does it? Or?
Again, I'm not a big expert on the Firewire or Spectra. You know, I started using Power Pro. Oh gosh, probably 10 years ago or close to it, and it's just what's worked well for me, and I've just stuck with it. Let's see here. I got one more goodie bag. Who wants it? So next time you sit closer. Yes, sir. Cards? Yes, I'll have some cards. Just see me now. Are we done? Any more questions?